RYOBI releases a track saw, but is it worthy of your money? We'll find out in a moment. I'm Tim Johnson. You're watching Shop Tool Reviews. RYOBI just recently released the brand new PTS01, and it's their 18-volt HP track saw. Runs on a 6.5 inch, or doesn't run on. It has a 6.5 inch blade, spins up to 4,300 RPM. As I mentioned, it's part of their HP lineup, runs on the 4 amp hour HP battery. At least that's what it's kitted with. So in the kit, you get 2 tracks that are each 27.5 inches long. You get the saw, a 4 amp hour battery, and a charger all in the kit. Now let's take a closer look at this saw, because there are some things that, well, we need to get closer to actually show you what's going on. Then after we use it, we'll come back and talk about pricing, talk about warranty, and what we think of it. This is the RYOBI PTS01, and it is their brand new 18-volt HP brushless track saw. Now it comes with everything you see here in the kit. It comes with the saw, the blade, 40-tooth carbide blade or carbide tooth blade, with the charger, a 4 amp hour HP battery, and these 2 tracks. Each track is 27.5 inches long for a total of 55 inches. Now this is a 6.5 inch circular saw or plunge cut saw, otherwise known as a track saw. Basically the saw rides on these tracks and makes dead straight cuts, much like a table saw, but without the need to take the sheet goods and run it through the table saw. So you just put this on the track and run it. You've probably heard of that. Anyway, we get a dust port here. It's going to fit for internal connections as well as external. I believe that's 1 1/4 and 1 3/4. We get some bevel adjustment from -1 degree, so we can actually put a negative bevel on there, all the way up to 48 degrees, and we do that by a thumb screw here on the front, but you also have to loosen this thumb screw here on the back as well. We can also vary our depth of cut here from 0 all the way down to 2 1/4 inches. That would be without the track. With the track on there, the cut depth is 1 15/16, so right just less than 2 inch plunge cut when we have the track, when it's riding on top of the track. Without the track, we're looking at right at 2 1/4 inches for depth of cut. That's at a 90. At 45, it's going to be less than that. At 45, I believe it's 1 9/16 without the track, 1 maybe 5/16 with the track. Max RPM of this saw is 4,300. Max RPM on the saw blade is 7,000, if you notice that, but the saw definitely does not turn that much. If you had a faster saw, you could still run that blade, but the max on the RYOBI is 4,300, and that will be a no load speed on that. So obviously when you're cutting, it's going to be much less than 4,300. Let's look at some of the mechanics here, some of the features on this saw as well. Now before we put the blade on there, we'll take a closer look at some of these. As I mentioned, we get 0 or actually -1 degree all the way up to 45 degrees. And we can adjust that by loosening this thumb screw here. And then I'll loosen this one right here in the back. And then once I do that, now I can actually adjust this to where we need it to be. Very easy to read these numbers. Basically we have white printing on a black background, so very easy to see. It's not silver on silver or aluminum on aluminum. I can see my pointer there, and I can set that to 45 degrees and lock that down. But then I also want to lock down this back, because if I don't, you see we get quite a bit of flex here. This shoe or this plate is not a metal or an aluminum plate. It is a composite or plastic plate, so there's quite a bit of flex in there. If we don't lock down this back thumb screw as well, there's too much play. But once we get that locked down, it's pretty good, stays pretty stable. Obviously in the 90 position, it's going to stay even more stable. I can lock it down to 0 or 90. And again, it's pretty stable right there. Now let's look at the max depth. So this is basically how far the saw is going to plunge. And how this works is you turn that thumb screw and you can adjust this up or down. So if I wanted to stop it at 1 inch, I could set it there, tighten down my thumb screw, and that's going to lock that down. There's some little teeth right here on this slide, so even when you loosen it up, you can kind of raise it in the back and it'll go up, and same thing pulling it back down. It's going to grab on those teeth, you can tighten that down, and here's what happens. There's a little plastic shelf right there that once I go down, it's going to stop on that. Now to do that, to release the saw, I have to release what would look typically like a trigger lock, and that's actually releasing the saw to actually plunge. So without pushing that, you see the saw is locked out, but you'll see once I push this button, I can push this down, and we'll see that this hits right there on that piece of plastic. So that's how it's setting that depth of cut. That little shelf right there is hitting on that. So that's kind of plastic on plastic. And this little switch right here switches you between cutting or plunge cutting. So you see the saw blade, and then this is to lock out for like changing a blade. We'll show that here in one moment. And this will be for scoring only. So I can flip this back, and now it's only going to allow the saw to go down and basically barely score. As you can see, when I release this, that's as far as it goes down, is right there. So basically it's barely going to score the surface with that 6.5 inch blade. And you see that there's a pin that's actually hitting against that little shelf right there, keeping that from going anywhere. Now once I flip it here, I'm in plunge cut mode. Then when I release this, it's going to go down. And then when I let it back up, it's going to lock up, and that pin is going to fit right there in that recession and going to lock that back on the top. So every time, once I come back all the way up, I have to release again with, again, what looks like a trigger lock, but it's really not. It's the plunge lock. I have to release that again to be able to plunge once more. Now once I have it out of the lock position, I don't have to keep my hand on it. I can just push all the way down, and it will stay down on wherever we have this adjusted to as far as the max depth of cut. Now before we put our blade on, let's take a look at these tracks. So we see on one side of the track, so this would be the top when we lay this down on a piece of wood. We've got the logo there, pretty easy to see that. This is just some, feels like some black plastic where the saw is going to slide on, and then an aluminum track. Now what we have here is a piece of rubber, and that is what's actually going to lay right on your line or right on your marks on your wood to tell you exactly where that saw blade is going to go. Well, the first time you use this, please understand, we're going to cut this off with the blade. In other words, we're going to put the saw on the track, and when we plunge cut, it's going to start cutting this rubber, and that's going to cut a perfect, true line here that's going to mesh with the blade itself. So understand that right now, you know, your first time out, don't try to cut your finished piece. You want to try it on a piece of scrap so that you can cut that rubber line or cut this rubber edge so that it meshes perfectly with that blade. Now on the back side of this, we have some rubber strips here that are going to basically grip onto that wood when we lay it down, and so it doesn't just slide around very easy. So that's going to give us some grip so that when the saw blade or when the saw actually runs on the track, it's not going to move all around. Also, to aid in that, we have a clamp here, and this clamp actually slides in to this channel. We can clamp this down on a table or wherever we're cutting our wood or plastic or whatever it is we are cutting. So a pretty cool little clamp that's also included. And then we also have a riving knife which goes into the bottom of the saw. I'll show you that here in a moment. You can decide whether you want to use that or not. I probably will not be using it. I'll show you why in one moment. Typically you'll see this on table saws, and this helps you guide the wood true through the blade. And same way with the track saw. However, when you're going all the way or you're not going all the way through the wood, or you've got some kind of sub-base material where, like a piece of foam or something, you're cutting your wood on top of, this riving knife will go below that blade and will hang up on that, so you can't run this riving knife. And again, I'll show you that here in one moment. We get 2 of these tracks when we get the kit, and you can easily put these together by taking, it's a 3mm Allen wrench, which you'll get with the kit, and you'll just loosen these screws. So you'll put your plates together, then tighten down your set screws. So now we've got one continuous piece of 55-inch track. Now you want to make sure that your edges line up and they're not offline, so you can kind of look down the track and see if you're off at all. And if you are, you may want to do some adjustments. If you are off, then you may want to loosen these up and move this around wherever you need it to be. So it may not be perfect the first time you just shove this together. Now before we put this on the track, let's actually put our blade on here. Now it may look like that we need to take this cover off to put our blade on, but we really don't. We can flip back around here and you can see this lockout in the wrench position. That's where we want to go to actually change the blade. Flip that down. And now, again, I need to release my trigger or release the plunge. And then when I do, I can let go of it, and then it's going to lock in right there. So it's going to lock kind of midway, and if I flip this around, we can see our Allen screw or our wrench or our, we can see our bolt or Allen bolt for the actual blade. So we can take our onboard wrench, which is right there. Actually, there's 2 onboard wrenches right there, one for the track and one for the saw. I'm going to take my T-handle here, and then I can press the spindle lock, which is right there. And since this is blade right, then it should be lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, not reverse threads. Like a blade left would be reverse threads. Blade right saw is going to be regular or standard threads. So lefty-loosey on this. So now we'll take our blade, slide it in here. Make sure it's all the way seated on. And then again, standard threads, so righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. By the way, if things look a little different right now, let me push my spindle lock. Tighten that down. If things look a little different, like a little dirtier saw, a little dirtier blade, a used blade, it's because this portion of the filming actually went corrupt. So we had to refilm this portion. So we've already done the review of the saw, cleaned it up a little bit, come back to capture this portion. So just wanted to let you know if things got a little out of frame or the saw looked a little different. That's what's happened. So we're coming back around for you guys to finish this out. So now, as I'm done, I can push that lock again, and that's going to release that saw and push it back up to the top. Now, with this blade, I will say if you're doing high-end stuff, if you're wanting a really, really clean cut on some really nice plywood or hardwood, and you're getting a little bit of tear out, you may want to step up to a finer blade, such as this 60-tooth Diablo. I believe it's a 40-tooth that comes with it, but a 60-tooth Diablo is going to give a little cleaner cut. This is a little thicker kerf. That should not matter on your lineup as far as your cutting edge, because it's indexing from the saw, so that width is just going to cut more away from the saw. Should not affect you lining up and your measurement, if you will, if that makes sense. Spin this around and take a look here. So we've got a couple of things going on. I talked about the depth of cut, but what we have right here on the base or the shoe of the saw here, as I mentioned, this is plastic or composite, and you'll see a couple of thumb screws here. There's 2 here, and then there's one hidden kind of down in here. Both of them, or all 3 of them, actually affect how they ride on the track itself. I'll lay my track down here, And we'll just lay the saw. There we go. So now the saw is on there, glides rather nicely, not too bad whatsoever. However, if I put a little side pressure on this, the saw comes right off the track, okay? Doesn't take much at all to actually lift that off. So there's nothing holding that on there. So a couple of things. You can use this little guy right here. So if I loosen this thumb screw, you see that little tongue kind of sticks up. Well, what that does, that lines up with a little groove in this track right here. So in the aluminum track, there's a groove, and that little tongue that sticks out seats itself in that track. And so now you see it's not, I can put pressure here and it's not tipping over. Now one thing I will notice is, or that you'll notice as well, is as I put some pressure, it does still twist. Again, you're not going to stop that with that plastic or composite shoe. That's just something you're going to have to work out. There's still, you can see I can twist this back and forth and rock it. Maybe I can even, you'll see the movement here. So I can still rock this saw because it's not really fine-tuned in there. And so with that, what we can do, let me loosen this back up. And same thing, kind of same idea with these back thumb screws. You'll see this little tongue stick up right there. Now what that does is it actually, and the same with this one back here, you can see the one back here. What that does is applies pressure against the wall of this aluminum riser here, and kind of keeps tension against the keeps tension against the saw, against the track. So rather than having this slop like we have right here, quite a bit of slop, I can make sure the saw is completely seated. I can go ahead and stick this one in the groove, so to make sure we're not getting a tip, and then I can apply pressure with this one, tighten that thumb screw, apply pressure with this one. There's a little raised edge you can push against, tighten that thumb screw, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when you see this. And so now it takes out that slop. So now no longer do I have any slop, but what it does do, it does create a little bit of friction. So I can still move this, but there is a bit more tension because we're literally pushing those plastic edges against that aluminum track. So what I did was I just took a little tension off of it to where I'm riding against it, but I really don't have a lot of pressure against it. And that really frees it up some more. Still taking out a lot of the slop, so we still get a little bit, but not near as much as we had. And so those are going to be your adjustments on the track itself. And just remember, on this track, get our saw off here. On this track, when you get it, this rubber tongue is going to stick out a lot further. And when you make your first cut, your saw blade is actually going to cut that to make it true to exactly where your saw blade is going to ride. So just understand that where it's sticking out, you need to make a sacrificial cut on your first cut to cut the complete length of both of these tracks, and that's going to index this rubber lip to exactly where your saw blade is going to ride. And also, as far as the riving knife goes, I think I may have mentioned that I'm not going to be running that on the testing that I'm doing. I need to put my saw down in the maintenance mode or in the blade changing mode, make sure my battery is out. And then this Allen screw right here, I believe that's a 5mm. And then the riving knife slides up there like that. I can tighten that. Now here's why I'm not running it. So if you're using, say, a sacrificial foam board or a board underneath your saw where you're cutting through your main layer, but then your second layer, you're not cutting all the way through, that riving knife is going to drag. The riving knife is only going to work if you're actually making a complete cut all the way through all the materials you're cutting through. So that's why I'm not running that riving knife. You can choose to do what you want to do. I think it's very important on a table saw, and I think it's less important here. But again, that's your choice of whether or not you want to run this riving knife. I'm not going to do it on the testing that we're doing here, just so it doesn't get in the way. Again, I can push my button, get that saw blade out of the way. Okay, so I've got my track on a piece of plywood. I've got my 4 amp hour battery in here. We're going to go ahead and make a plunge cut. Just going to cut a sliver off of this plywood, 3/4 inch plywood. But it's also going to true up our edge here, this piece of rubber. So we'll see that rubber start to get trimmed. So I'll plunge it down, and I'll probably back it up to make sure I cut the end off of this. In fact, I'm going to slide my plate up, and then I'll probably slide the track to make sure that we finish that cut as well. So I'm going to push my lock. So as you can see right here, it started truing up that rubber tongue to the exact place where that blade is. So that's what it's cutting that sliver off. Let me back it up and cut the rest of that off. So you see now we've trued it up all the way to here. So now let's go forward. Okay, now we've got it actually trued up. I'm just going to make a full length pass on this piece of wood here and cut the whole thing off. I will say that you need to make sure that you've trued up your two halves here, or your two tracks where they go together, because I can feel that transition there. Much better. I loosened up the tension that keeps the base plate tight to the track, and that definitely made that transition a little easier. Let's make another cut. Yes, much better. Trying to keep that from being so tight, and gave it a little more tolerance there, and that saw slides so much better. I'm going to switch to a 45, and we'll see how this goes. Interesting. I had my depth of cut set at 1 inch rather than maxing it out. So it didn't cut all the way through. So let me change that. Make another pass. And there we go. Much better job. Now let's hit that one more time with the 45. Okay, I'm going to hook up some dust extraction now and see if we can't keep down some of that dust. Back to our 90. Turn our dust extraction on, and then we'll make a pass. So I will say we did have some dust flying around, but much less than without the dust extraction. So it's catching the majority of that sawdust. Okay, here's the deal. Does it cut well? Yeah, it cuts pretty decent. As far as power, I think it's got plenty of power to cut whatever you need to. You know, whether it's even up to 2x material, but typically you're cutting sheet goods with this, or maybe cutting the bottoms off of doors, things like that. Anytime you would typically need a table saw, now you can use that track saw to do the same thing and get that perfect line. I will tell you the two-piece track, so you get two 27.5-inch pieces of track, which total 55 inches, and you can continue to add to that for as long as you need it. It does need truing up. So in other words, when you put it together, it doesn't just automatically kind of seam up and be perfect. I could look down it and actually see, you know, where it was pieced together. So I loosened it a couple of times to get it the straightest I could. But even after doing that, running the saw on it, I could definitely feel where that transition was between the two tracks. Now, I loosened up on the tolerances on the plastic gauges that kind of push against the track, and then it got a lot better. Now, it's still a decent saw and cuts pretty decent as far as a straight line, but if you're doing this professionally, you're building high-end cabinets, high-end carpentry stuff, you're probably better off going to a more prominent track saw, a Festool, even Makita's track saw, Bosch's track saw. There's several that are out there. However, when you do that, you're stepping up in price quite a ways as well. You can get this whole kit for $299. So for less than $300, you get the two pieces of track, you get the 4-amp-hour battery, the charger, and the saw all in, so you can start cutting with your track saw for less than $300 or right at $300. Now, those other brands we were talking about, you're going to be, I think Makita you can get in at like $4 something, but I believe that's without a charger, without a battery. So you add a charger and a battery, and then you're going up there in that $500-600 range. Festool is going to be north of $600. So really and truly, for the price, you can't find anything near it. So will it handle your entry-level stuff? Absolutely. Is it going to be an entry-level pro saw? That depends on what you're doing. So anyway, great little saw for what it is. I would say DIY and somebody doing things professionally that doesn't need kind of the top of the line stuff and could understand some forgiveness on some of those cuts, because it's not going to be absolutely perfect. Otherwise, definitely a great saw for the price. As I mentioned, sub $300, and you get all-in kit, if you will. 3-year warranty on this as well. You can already find this at Home Depot and on homedepot.com. Hey, would you keep track of us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter? And if you don't mind, would you hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already? And by all means, if you hated our video, then give us a thumbs down. But would you let us know in the comments why? Have a great day and keep smiling.